let's talk about where you think morality comes from. So, in the religious view, obviously, there are certain things that I believe are capable of understanding by any sentient human being. So I don't believe that all human beings, in the absence of religion, are immoral people who go around murdering their neighbors and raping their sisters. I think that and in fact, this is pretty well embedded in even Judaic philosophy, the idea that there is a sort of natural law theology where you, as just a normal person, know not to kill people and know not to steal and know to set up courts of law. This is what they call the seven commandments to Noah. But the idea is that anyone can basically discover these things. And there are universals across culture about you're not supposed to murder your brother. But the biblical reading is that to reach a more sophisticated level of morality that leads to a sort of right-based society we see here, you at least need the catalyzing enzyme of a Judeo-Christian religion in order to get here. That would, I think, be the most rationalistic argument on behalf of Judeo-Christian values.
But where is here again?
Here would be a civilization that values individual rights above the values of the collective, that says that people are to be treated, to use the biblical phrase, as made in the image of God, that we should treat individuals as made in the image of God. That does not happen in the absence of a Judeo-Christian value system. That's the religious argument. Although
that is more of a historical argument.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's a rationalistic argument, because the deeply religious argument would be God said so, so do it. Right. But that's not the argument that I think is the most compelling, because that only works if you believe in God and if you believe in revelation. So that's not the argument that I tend to make, because I don't find it intellectually convincing. It's an argument from authority, which of course is not particularly convincing. So I tend to make the historical argument, which is that history brought us to that the reason we are at this point in history is because without that particular catalyzing enzyme, you don't get what you have here, which is why the West and Western civilization crop up in a Judeo-Christian system, but don't crop up in, for example, Islamic countries, and Islam's been around for 1,000 years. So number one, what do you make of that argument? And then I want to get into where you think morality comes from.
Right. Well, a few points. One, I'm not convinced by that historical argument. I think you can cherry pick the data either way and come up with a different conclusion. And even if I agreed with it, it wouldn't make the case I think you want to make, because it would be an instance of what's called the genetic fallacy, which is even if we granted that our respect for individual rights, say, came from a Judeo-Christian tradition, it doesn't mean that it can only come from there, or that it even is best gotten from there. And I would say that it actually hasn't come principally from there. And there are many ways. So, for instance, you could say that Christianity, in particular, was in part responsible for the fall of the Roman Empire. Right. So Christianity undermined the notion that the Roman emperor was a god. It made it harder to recruit true soldiers, and they had to farm it out to mercenaries. And it eroded what you might call traditional Roman values. And then the Western Empire fell, and we ushered in the Dark Ages. And insofar as there was a reboot to civilization at that point, it was largely the result of the learning and philosophical insight of antiquity being preserved by, of all people, the
Islamic world, right?
So I think you can have it any way you want looking at history, but it just doesn't get you there in terms of the moral content and in this case, the political or social content coming from the Bible or any other religious text.
So then why here? Meaning, like, why in Judeo-Christian civilization, but not Islamic civilization? Because you mentioned rediscovery of Aristotle and reuse of Aristotle in 10th and 11th centuries was really beginning, in the Islamic world long before Aquinas really repopularized it in the 13th and 14th centuries.
Yeah. Well, one, I think it's, from my point of view, it's impossible to ignore the influence of Islam. I mean, Islam is its own ideology and set of dogmatisms that are inflexible and at odds with the spirit of science fundamentally. And despite the fact that there was a brief period where there seemed to be some, happy convergence between scientific and mathematical insight and Islam, for the most part, Islam has been hostile to a real intellectual life, and in a way that Christianity was hostile even when the scientific worldview was struggling to be born in the 16th century and the 15th century. What we have historically is a real war of ideas. And I mean, just it can be crystallized in the moment where Galileo was shown the instruments of torture and put under house arrest by people who refused to look through his telescope. Right? I mean, so that was the genius of religion paired with the emerging genius of science in that room.
Well, to be fair, I mean, Galileo was originally sponsored by the church, and so is Copernicus. But there's no question there was a backlash from the church to this stuff.
Yes, and the backlash makes sense because there is a intellectual progress on questions of how the cosmos is organized or where it came from or how life began. All of these questions are the scientific answers to which are in zero-sum contest with the doctrines found in the books. Now, it's true that there are religious people, and now even the Pope, who have relaxed their adherence to tradition enough to make room for something like evolution, right? But it is still a problem.
Not a super new idea. I mean, right? Aquinas was talking about this in the 13th century and 14th century. The idea that if it was in science and it was contradicted by the book, then you're misreading the book, right? I mean, that's a pretty old idea.
But that is to subvert science rather than the book in Aquinas' case. I mean, Aquinas thought heretics should be put to death, right? His argument for capital punishment for heresy. And Augustine made the same argument. Augustine thought they should be tortured, right? So that those two great lights of the Catholic Church gave us the Inquisition and gave us more than a century.
I think it's also fair to say that they were rather instrumental in the development of modern science. So the Dark Ages, first of all, I think the Dark Ages are a bit of an exaggeration in terms of the Dark Ages themselves saw a massive growth in technology and architecture, for example. I mean, Gothic cathedrals are built during the Dark Ages. But,
sure.
But the scientific world is, virtually every major university in the Western world was sponsored by the Catholic Church. And I'm not a great Catholic defender, right? But virtually all major universities were sponsored by the Catholic Church, which saw consonance between science and religion as a reason to actually investigate the natural world.
Well, no, I mean, I think that's backwards. I think the reality is there was everything that was good that was done anywhere at any time prior to, pick your year, was done by some religious person. I mean, there was just nobody else to do the job, right? So you could make the argument that Catholics built every bridge in Europe until the Protestants came around and they built their half of the bridges. I mean, so there was just no one else to do the job. And we're human beings who want to pursue various ends, many of which require breakthroughs in learning. So, engineering got born in a religious context. Physics was, the first physicists were people who were Christians, who were, as is often pointed out, Newton spent half his time worrying about biblical prophecy. Now, I think that was an objective waste of his time. He also spent a lot of his time worrying about astrology, right? So you're trying to
alchemy,
yes, and alchemy, and alchemy, insofar as there was anything to it, apart from sort of the internal myth-making that may be of use to some people, edged into chemistry, right? So there was often a real science at the back of a lot of merely mortal confusion where people were trying to work things out. I would argue very much under the shadow of religious commitments that they need not have had and were not actually serving their ultimate ends. And this for me is true in the moral sphere as well, because this is why the Bible, in my view, can't be the real repository of our moral wisdom in any sense, because when you go to read it, you are forced to ignore certain passages or reinterpret them rather aggressively to conform to what you now in the 21st century have every reason to believe is good or a direction worth going socially. So, it is just an inconvenient fact that slavery is endorsed in the Bible. It's explicitly endorsed in the Old Testament, and it's certainly not repudiated in the New, right? And Jesus told slaves to serve their masters and to serve their Christian masters especially well. So there's no place in the Bible where you can get a truly compelling case against slavery, because the creator of the universe clearly expected slavery to be a human institution. Well,
except for abolitionists finding enough inspiration in the Bible to use it as their main text.
But they did that despite what's in the Bible.
Well, I think that is, I mean, I don't want to, this shouldn't sound insulting because it's not meant as an insult. I think that from a religious point of view, that's a simplistic reading of the Bible's role in human affairs, meaning that when any written document is given to any group of people, it has to be given to people in a way that they can understand. It's not that slavery was endorsed by the Bible. It's that slavery is universal among human civilization until modern times.
But it was no. There were religions that have different points of view on all these questions, right? So it was possible in the 5th century BC to have a take on ethics with respect to something like slavery or the killing of combatants or non-combatants. That was quite a bit more modern and ethical and civilized than is found in the Bible. So I mean, you might not like some of their other commitments, but take something like Jainism, right? I mean, Jainism, Gandhi got his nonviolence from Jainism. I mean, Jainism is just, in truth, a religion of peace, unlike Islam, which is the word peace is a euphemism for the word surrender there, or submission. So it's possible for people 2,500 years ago to wake up one day and even write a book which suggests don't harm anyone or anything, even a cricket.
Right. Well, that's fine. But the question is, how many converts does Jainism have? Meaning that the point of, if you're going to give a book over, let's pretend that you thought that God existed and that you were He. And it was your job to convey to a group of human beings what you think morality should be, understanding that they're going to take that and develop that because we do have this gift of human reason that we use to develop things. And so there's a root text, and then it is developed over time. This is why I think Judaism is particularly kind of unique in this respect, because that's been an ongoing dialectic for literally thousands of years. I mean, there's legitimately thousands of pages of tractates of just people arguing about these particular issues. You would say that the argument should have started from the point of there was no text for them to argue about, and they should have just argued from sort of a priori reason, maybe.
No, I mean, I respect text, but I think the principle of revelation is a problem. But just to back up for a second, I think it's certainly problematic for you as a Jew to argue that the legitimacy or success of a religion is best measured by the number of adherents in the year 2018. Right?
No, but the point of Judaism also is that it says in the Bible itself that God is going to make great peoples of all of Abraham's sons, for example. And as Maimonides put it in the Jewish belief, even the growth of Islam and Christianity, which are obviously based on a certain Judaic root. I think Islam less so, because there's an actual rewriting of the Old Testament, and the New Testament not as much. Maimonides suggested that Christianity had basically been brought about as an extension of Judaism, which is the greatest. Christianity is the greatest converting religion in the history of the world.
Right. So but it seems strange to count at the success in terms of numbers of Christianity and Islam, given that the
basic principle. The bottom line is the basic principles of Judaism. Those have been embraced in a way that the basic principles of Jainism have not across time, and they've shaped civilizations in a way that is significantly better than the principles of Jainism have shifted any number of small people, or a small group of people, not small people, obviously.
Well, so again, it's just the fact that you and I could improve the Bible with very little thought, just by taking out, if we just took out the worst passages that have no possible redeemable content this year, or I would argue any other year, right? The Bible's already improved, right? So the fact that we could edit it to anyone's advantage is a problem for the idea that this was written by an omniscient being and not to be superseded by any human effort now or generations from now. And it's a problem not just for the Bible, it's a problem for the Quran. And this notion of revelation is what gets us there. Now, if you're going to treat all books as the product of just human minds, brilliant or not, and every shelf in the bookstore or library has the same status with respect to the merely mortal provenance of these ideas, then it's fine. Then you can pick and choose the best ideas, right? And then you can be slavishly attached to, the Plato's Republic, and that can be your favorite book. But what Revelation gets you is this notion that no, this isn't just a book, right? This is the product of omniscience on some level. And that ties your hands intellectually, because then you are forced to make these acrobatic contortions around passages which clearly have no good application now and didn't even have a good application then. And when you view it from the other side, when you think about just how good a book would be if an omniscient being wrote it, I mean, that is it's very easy to see what could be in there that would still astonish us. I mean, or it would just be, it's very easy to see what could be in there that would prove, just based on the time of its emergence, that this couldn't have been the product of merely human minds. And there's nothing like that in the Bible.
To respond to some of those points, I think that there's a lot there, so I'm going to try and kind of parse it as we go. I think that one of the arguments that is made, certainly in the Talmud, is the idea that human reason was generated in order to help reason through the Bible, basically. That the Bible is not just, here it is, obey it, but it is also a constant conversation between God and man, in the sense that there is a active conversation that goes into the interpretation of these texts. And so what the Bible really is an anchor, and the ship is anchored to the anchor, but there is still some slack in the line, meaning that it is not that you are now tied to this anchor at the bottom of the ocean. There's still a boat that's attached, but human reason is designed in order so that you can wobble through with this anchor attached to you. And if without the anchor, you end up in a land of utopianism. And I think the history of the 19th and 20th century in the Dostoevskian view would be a good example of how that happens. And so the construction of alternate morality that is not based on any Judeo-Christian notions can take you in any number of horrible places that are significantly worse in virtually every way than the places that Judeo-Christian religion brought you for 2,000 years. My argument is not that Judeo-Christianity itself, the Judaism on its own, is everything that you need, right? As an Orthodox Jew, my argument is not that. My argument, which if it were, then I wouldn't be out there caring about science or about nature, as you say. You know, people who are fundamentalists don't care about any of those things. They think everything you need to know is found in this particular book. I don't think I know how to fix my car from the Bible.
Right.
But what I do think is that in the Straussian view, there's a tension between Athens and Jerusalem. There's a tension between revelation and reason. And that without either one of these things, that reason without revelation ends up in utopias of our own creation that end up in can end up in horrifying places, ranging from death camps to gulags. And that revelation without reason ends up in theocratic tyranny. And so you do need both of those in an interchange in order to have something that means something. And the reason that omniscience matters is because if there is no belief in an objective level of moral truth, then everything becomes subject to interpretation, up to and including, if you were intellectually honest enough, laws like murder, because maybe murder doesn't apply to people who are outside my tribe. Maybe it doesn't apply to people who are outside my family or people I just want to kill for my own benefit. So this is where we get into the alternative moral. So this is where I'm going to ask you about your moral basis. So
let me respond to some of that, though, because
sure.
there's a lot there. So it's not going to surprise you that I disagree with that summary.
This is the fun part, yeah.
So, I mean, to take your anchor, I think there is an anchor, or at least a foundation to everything we can discover or value, and it's human conversation, right? And I think the morality, because I think revelation, it simply didn't happen, right?
Right.
It's just human beings talking to one another at any point in history, thinking internally. I mean, there's been extraordinary people, and they've had extraordinary insights, and they've shared them, and they've codified them in books. So the morality or pseudo-morality or barbaric morality that you find in various places in various texts was put there by people, right? It's not that it came from some other source and that we need to be anchored to it. It is the record of a merely human conversation that, I'll be the first to admit, has in various parts real value and real wisdom in it, and hence the reason why people are so attached to some of it, certainly. But it's just that's not unique for the Bible. That you can find that among Greek philosophers or various places in antiquity, and you can find it in modern variants. I mean, you and I in one another's presence here, having a conversation that gets recorded, we can say something that is highly relevant to the question of how to live a good life. And if we were doing this 3,000 years ago and it happened to get written down, it would be one of the lines that people would think had been revealed if they lost track of what its actual source was. And so it's people like ourselves that have always done this work. And so the basic framework here is that all we have is human conversation, and all we can appeal to are honest efforts to get at the truth here. And the choice for me is between a 21st century conversation where we avail ourselves of all of the intellectual tools we can get in hand, and that includes whatever is good in religion, right? So if there's something that is in Ecclesiastes, that is better put there than any place else in the canon of all of human knowledge, well, then of course we want to keep that, right? So
how do you decide what is the good? Because right now you're essentially playing Cotty under the tree, right? You get to sit there and say, here's a good moral standard, here's a bad moral standard, and you and I will sit here and our conversation will be better than a conversation 1,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. There's a question that I asked you actually last time we spoke publicly, and the question is, okay, so if that's the case, you and I tend to agree, I would think, on probably 95% of our central values about what it is that makes for a good life.
Right.
I think that we both believe in individual freedoms. I think we both believe in the ability to live as you choose, so long as you're not hitting anybody else in the face, as a general rule. I think that we both agree on all of these things. And so what I asked you last time is, why do we agree on these things? Is it because we just both happen to be super reasonable? Like we are just the most reasonable people who ever lived, and we just happen to be here at this time, and why didn't people 1,000 years ago know this? Or is it, back to my original argument, the fact that we grew up probably 10 miles from each other in a city that was built in a country that was built by people who believed all of these things that came from a book, half of which you think is crap, from from 1,000 years before Christ?
Well, so I think the environment in which we grew up, insofar as this is a product of culture, is not mostly defined by the Judeo-Christian tradition. It's mostly defined by secular politics and secular ethics that have, some of which are of a piece with those religions and other religions. Something like the Golden Rule. I mean, the Golden Rule predates Christianity, certainly. It's in Leviticus, I think. And
you love thy neighbor as thyself, in Leviticus.
Yeah, and but it's not unique there too. I mean, there are Greek philosophers. I think Epictetus articulated it someplace. The truth is, it predates our humanity on some basic level. You can see evidence of it in monkeys, right? There's an expectation of fairness even in monkeys, right? So this is we're running a software program that is morally relevant to us, that is riddled with bugs, but that predates our humanity. And so largely what civilization is, what the good parts of culture that will lead to something that is durable at the level of civilization, largely correct for our merely hominid, merely evolved, merely creaturely moral intuition. So for instance, like you and I have as front and center in our moral hardware a sense of disgust, right? And disgust has roots below anything that could be considered moral. It's just, you can smell something bad and you feel like vomiting, and but the truth is, in terms of the evolution of the brain doesn't evolve new modules that can do fundamentally new things. It has to evolve capacities that are predicated on the old hardware that was anchored to things like, I'm going to vomit based on that smell, right? And much of our moral thinking about the world is disgust-based or fear-based, and it gets applied to things like how you feel about gay marriage, say. So if you go into a Bible-thumping fundamentalist Christian context where you can find people who are just adamant that gay marriage is wrong, this disgust circuitry is tuned up through the lens of that social question. And so I view conversation about ethical truth and progress in ethical space being more a matter of reasoning and unhooking our reflexive, in this case, disgust-based intuitions from our sense of what is ultimately good. I mean, there are things that you and I might not be comfortable with the first time we consider them, that we can get comfortable with by thinking it through or imagining things from other people's perspectives.
Or at the very least that we think are immoral but still think that we have no business in doing anything about. Right?
Yeah, and ultimately, there are cases of kind of moral dumbfounding where you would have to admit that it's moral in the sense that you can't point to a victim, right? And
right. Jonathan Haidt talks about experiments like this, like somebody who's having sex with a dead chicken.
But it still disgusts you. I mean, to take it out of the moral sphere for a second, if I told you, well, I have Jeffrey Dahmer's sweater. It's been dry cleaned. Would you like to? Would you try it on? Right now, everyone recoils from that, right? But it's not. If you actually think about it, it's not something that, there's kind of a magical superstition intruding there, where you think that it's something that's been deposited in the sweater, even though, we dry cleaned it, 450 times, right? So it's, and if maybe a sweater is too charged, but to take something where there would be absolutely no question that
Hitler's
his DNA,
harmonica.
it's not covered with this creepy guy's DNA. It's something that you just, in order to recoil from it, you are thinking superstitiously, right? So you can correct for those.
So you're making a sociobiological explanation for morality, like basically it's an E.O. Wilson explanation for the evolution of morality?
No, to the contrary, I think that there are two very different ways to talk about morality with respect to our scientific understanding of ourselves. One is what you just referenced, this biological, evolutionary, descriptive story of how we got here. Why is it that we're the sort of apes that feel these sorts of ways about social interactions, say, right? And why is our moral thinking anchored to those properties? Then there's a completely separate question, which is the question that interests me morally, which is, given what we are, and given where we are right now, what is possible for us? How good could human life be? And what are the principles of neurobiology and everything else, economics and sociology and genetics, anything that can be brought to bear to change human experience? What are the principles whereby we can navigate in the space of all possible experience and experience better and better lives and a better and better world? And so that is a very different question, because it presupposes, just on its face, that we have to, most of our job is to fly the perch that has been prepared to us.
Right, and I think you and I agree on this, but I'm not sure why.
In the landscape of modern atheism, if Christopher Hitchens was the thunderous orator and Richard Dawkins was the rigorous scientist, then Sam Harris has always been the cool, calm, and deeply unsettling voice of reason. As you've all seen, he doesn't shout his arguments, he whispers them with a chilling precision that can be far more disruptive. Harris didn't just enter the conversation to debate the existence of God, he arrived to ask a more dangerous and fundamental question in a world where we've largely abandoned faith for facts in science and medicine. Why do we still give religion a free pass, man? So it's no surprise that his work is a relentless examination of the consequences of belief, and it forces everyone, atheists and believers alike, into a corner of uncomfortable honesty. Now let's take it back a little. Harris's impact began explosively with his first book, The End of Faith, published in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. While others debated foreign policy, Harris went straight for the ideological jugular. He argued that the attacks were not an aberration but a predictable outcome of faith itself, of believing things without evidence to the point where martyrdom becomes rational. And this to him wasn't just an attack on extremism, it was an indictment of the moderate faith that in his view provides the cover and the cultural legitimacy for the extremists to operate under the grass. For Harris, the problem wasn't just bad people, it was bad ideas, and we had to be brave enough to say so. Now, this immediately set him apart because he wasn't interested in polite diversity dialogues, he was interested in intellectual triage. Another thing that makes Harris such a unique and often controversial figure is his toolkit. He is a neuroscientist with a deep understanding of the human mind, and he is a lifelong practitioner of meditation, which means he is deeply engaged with the contemplative traditions of the East. This combination is crucial, man, because it allows him to dissect religious claims from the inside out. He can explain why a feeling of transcendence during prayer isn't evidence of God but a fascinating, reproducible state of brain chemistry. He can also argue that mindfulness and moral clarity aren't the exclusive properties of religion but are skills that can be honed through secular practice. Basically, he effectively steals religion's most powerful selling points, which are spiritual experience and ethical living, and argues that science and philosophy do them better and without the baggage of dogma. This leads to his most provocative and, for many, his most valuable contribution, his unflinching focus on Islam. At a time when many on the left were and still are hesitant to criticize another culture's belief, Harris dove in. He insisted and still insists with cold data-driven fury that we ignore the specific doctrines and violent texts within Islam, not just their misinterpretation by radicals, is a form of cowardice that has real-world bloody consequences. This has made him a lightning rod, accused of everything from Islamophobia to neoconservatism, but his supporters see it as the ultimate application of the skeptical principle: no idea, no matter how sacred, is above scrutiny, man, and something I think any sensible person should agree with. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that was some Harris for you guys. I really hope that you enjoyed the video as much as I did putting it together like usual, man. I hope I'll see you in the next video that I upload on Monday. Yeah, I'll see you around, guys. In the meantime, stay safe, hug your loved ones, and I'll see you around, man. Peace.